My friends, the Lord is with you.
And also with you.
Thank you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to John. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd is one who would die for the sheep. The hired hand, who is neither shepherd nor owner of the sheep, catches sight of the wolf coming and runs away, leaving the sheep to be snatched and scattered by the wolf. That is because the one who is hired works only for pay and has no concern for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. In the same way that the Creator knows me, and I know the Creator. For these sheep I will give my life. I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must lead them as well, and they will hear my voice. There will be one flock then, one shepherd. The Creator loves me for this, that I lay down my life to take it up again. No one takes it up from me. I lay it down freely. I have the power to lay it down, and I have the power to take it up again. This command I have received from my Creator. My friends, the Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
I'm not going to talk about the Good Shepherd, although there's tons of actual images of Good Shepherd, and actual tons of images of shepherds. So we'll just leave that for a year because it comes up every year. Okay, so we'll talk about being shepherd, because there's really some interesting stuff. And it's not always nice. But really, shepherds have some stories. Well, I got some stories to show. I actually grew up a mile from the sheep farm, so I do have a little bit of that. I'm going to go on a different track tonight. I have a confession to make, actually. I have a confession. Here's my confession. I hear voices. Now, before you think I've stepped off the edge of sanity, let's see if you might hear some of these same voices. I hear voices that say, watch out for number one. Voices that say, the government should do this or shouldn't do that, right? Or don't use my tax dollars to do this or don't use my tax dollars to do that. Or I hear voices that say, green living is the way to go. Green roofs and green houses, and don't use paper, use whatever, ceramic and washing. Art isn't here, is it? I hear voices that say successful people always drive nice cars and have lots of money. And I hear voices that say poor people are always sucking off of the rich people. And I hear voices that say old people are boring. And I hear voices that say young people don't care about anything but themselves. And I hear all kinds of voices. Do you too? Our world is filled with voices, all kinds of messages, and they get splashed on advertising and they get told. And I just got to marry Gary and Matt last weekend, so we call him Mr. Pretty. We get all kinds of voices in our world, and things come at us all the time. And it's almost, if you will, it's almost overwhelming, and it can be very hard to hear that still small voice of God that continually invites us into a relationship of love. That's a hard voice to hear, because it's not what we constantly get bombarded with, right? The last thing I do before I walk into the narthex is make sure that I take my stupid cell phone off, right? And we even have voices as ringtones, right? We got all kinds of voices. They're just surrounding and inundating us today. But the gospel, I think, is quite clear. It says, I know mine, and mine know me. I know mine, and mine know me. It seems that, at least in my own life, I have spent, I can't tell you how much, I have spent a ton of time, I was going to use a different word, I have spent a ton of time trying to, we put a really nice term on it these days, we call it discernment, we're trying to discern what God's will is, right? What's God want me to do? What's God leading me? What's God inviting me to do? All these kind of things. And we call it discernment. But I have spent a ton of time trying to figure out discernment and actually praying over tons of different decisions in my life. And I'm sure you all have too. And what I have finally figured out is that usually what happens in my experience is I spend all this time and energy trying to figure out what God's will is. And I finally get to the point where I'm so exhausted because I can't hear this still small voice of God that's supposedly speaking, and I'm deaf. And I finally get so exhausted I just do the decision that I think is the best decision to do, and then I go forward. What's usually amazing about that is after I make that decision, a certain sense of peace comes over me, and it's amazing how much I find God right there in the midst of that decision in the first place. And yet I have wasted hours and agonized for days or trying to decide, is this God's will? You know, should you get married or should you? No, I don't know, just do it. Karen, there you go, guys. You know, I mean, you do, I think that's the biggest challenge that we face in life. We do what we do, and we ought to be just happy being who we are, rather than trying to be or do something different than what we are. We've got to make decisions in life about who we are and how God is acting in our lives, just with the best information we have, and quit agonizing over whether that's the right decision or God's will or not. If we do that, I think we get ourselves in tune with the presence of God that is in that moment, or is in those decisions. Anytime you can make a decision and change it. I always, it's like, why don't I think of that? I had one spiritual director say, you can always decide to take the job, and if you don't like it, quit. But I had spent a month and a half worried about whether I should take this stupid job. It's like, well, that's dumb. But yet, that's how we get ourselves wrapped in these ideas, listening to all those outside voices. And they continually bombard us. There's one of the ancient church fathers, his name is St. John of the Cross, and I know, thank God, we don't call ourselves big long names like that. St. John of the Cross was really kind of those, talk about stepping off the edge of weird. He lived in the desert, he was a hermit, and the dude was not really popular, and it was kind of unique. Let's just call it unique. But what he did was really spend the majority of his life trying to get in contact with this God, so we call him a mystic in the church, an ancient mystic. This is what he said. In one of his books, he writes, the language of God is the experience God writes inside of our lives. What the desert drove him to was to find out that God wasn't out there somewhere where he had to go find him. God was right there in the midst of the experience of his life, every day. Whether it was picking cactus or trying to bake bread. It didn't make any difference. God was right there in the midst of it. I like to believe that what St. John of the Cross actually did was he discovered that the divine dwells within each and every one of us. And to that end, I kind of like to err on the side of science. Do you know, my friends, that in 2005, there was this wonderful geneticist. And he's a research geneticist he's actually the director of the Gene Structure Regulation Unit of the U.S. National Cancer Institute. Right, big title. The dude's smart. Let's just put it like that. And he actually did some research which I think is absolutely fascinating, and I really think it has an effect on who we are. In his research, he identified this particular thing, and I'm going to give you a little science just so that, it's not a worthless, what do they call that information that you really don't need? Trivia. It's not trivia. It's not just trivia to think. It's really something to think about. This particular person, Dean Hammer is his name. Dr. Dean Hammer identified a gene in 2005. Identified a gene. Remember, we're doing the gene mapping, right? Actually identified a gene, and he calls it the God gene. And that gene actually leads us, if you will, in particular, it leads us into kind of this mystical union with God. It is the primal protein pump
that actually allows people to enter into those experiences. My friends, what I think he discovered is what another friend of mine discovered a long time ago, who said, you and I really have divine DNA that's flowing throughout our bodies. We really are a part of God, and we just have to realize that God never leaves us. You know, we've got to get rid of that concept of sin that says we can take ourselves out of relationship with God because we can't. Sorry. You know, the gene actually runs in us. The God gene actually runs in us. If you realize that just one small drop of blood, you ever watch somebody who's got diabetes poke themselves right with that little thing? One small drop of blood from our body, it can tell us our blood type, it can tell us the amount of sugar in our blood, it can tell us the amount of iron, the amount of potassium, calcium, and any other number of factors. Take that drop of blood out of relationship with the body, and what does it do? It dries up and eventually blows away. I believe what this gospel really is inviting us to is to make sure that we keep ourselves in relationship with the divine that dwells within. And that means, I think, doing exactly what we do here tonight, to gather every week, to gather with us as a community, to keep ourselves in relationship to each other, and consequently, we end up in relationship with the divine. We have a divine DNA, and that is our call. That is the invitation that God constantly offers to us to stay connected with that source of our being. If we spend time listening and speaking and interacting with the divine in our lives, we'll start to hear that still, small voice. And we'll be free to just act like we're being invited to act. To stay connected with the divine actually brings us a multitude of gifts. And that is my hope and my prayer for us as we step into this week. That we might be able to really touch that divine that's flowing in our lives. Where is God, my friends? Where is God? Right here, right now. You are enough. I am enough. This is enough. It's okay. It's okay to just be who we are because God loves us just this way. That's what's so flipping awesome. Do you get that second reading? It said, beloved, see what love has been bestowed on us, that we may be called children of God, because that is what we are, children of God. Another friend of mine puts it like this: never let your memories be greater than your dreams.